And there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another fantastic installment from very high above all the puerile and insipid bombastic twits in the Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the depths of the Middle Swamp in Wyoming's capital of Cheyenne. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy, very, very snowy Wednesday down here in the Middle Swamp. Last night, when I was coming home from the capital, it was a snowstorm that you don't see all that often. The kind that the plows don't even have a chance at keeping up with. I'm pretty sure when I was driving back to the Cowboy State Politics Swamp Studio, there was at least a good 3 inches of snow on the ground. But I made it, and this morning there's quite a bit more snow on the ground. So welcome to the program, my friends. Happy Wednesday. We begin this morning with the County Commissioners Association. You know, it is often said that the government that is closest to the people governs best. But in this case, it is the government that is closest to the people that governs the most liberally. A couple times a year, the Wyoming County Commissioners Association gets together to discuss legislation and different policies that are happening throughout the state. And this past January, the Wyoming County Commissioners got together in Cheyenne for their annual legislative meeting or summit or whatever it is they're calling it. But the only thing that we really do know is that it was jam-packed with a bunch of liberals. Now, I'm not saying that every Wyoming County Commissioner is a solid liberal. I'm saying that most of them are. Here's the evidence, all the evidence that you need, my friends. They elected their new chairman, a person named Natalia Macker, who is a Teton County Commissioner and is, if not the only, one of the only elected Democrats in the state of Wyoming. And it's more than that, though. They didn't just elect her. Natalia Macker was the only person who was nominated to be the chairman of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. And now just think about this for a second. Most Wyoming County commissioners campaigned as Republicans, because if they didn't, they wouldn't get elected. And yet, the only person that was nominated to chair that entire organization, which, by the way, takes $500,000 of your money in the form of dues every year, but the only person that they nominated was a Democrat. And not only a Democrat, one from Teton County. I have in my hot little hands, well, actually on the computer, but I have in my hands the cover letter and the signature page from the Wyoming County Commissioners Association's legislative priority sheet. Here's what it reads, and I quote, "To the Honorable 68th Legislature. Please find the attached results of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association's general body legislative discussion that was held on January 23rd, 2025. At the meeting, association members discussed, debated, and individually voted on each bill as reflected on the included signature sheet and spreadsheet. These positions taken on these bills reflect the position of all 23 Wyoming counties." We hope that you find this information useful. If you have any questions, let us know. Natalia Macker, WCCA President. So it reflects the views of all 23 county commissioners. Now, let me just tell you what some of those views are, because I also have a copy of their legislative priority sheet, and it lists the bills that they're tracking and the bills that they're interested in. And let's just see where they land, because most of them campaigned as Republicans, so you would think that they would have a Republican point of view when it comes to legislation. Not so, my friends. For example, House Bill 169, to refresh your memory, here's what they say about it. An act relating to taxation, establishing a homeowner property tax exemption, specifying applicability, providing the sunset date, and providing legislative findings. House Bill 169 is the House's version of the big tax cut bill. The one that passed, a similar version to the one that's passed out of the Senate. I'll get to these two bills in just a second because there's another big story on those. But House Bill 169 is the House's version of the big property tax cut. Wouldn't you know, the Wyoming County Commissioners Association opposes it. They also oppose House Bill 176, which is the vacancies in public office and amendments. That one they oppose. But if you read through this list, there is a the evidence, a gigantic pile of evidence that clearly your Wyoming County Commissioners really aren't in favor of any sort of conservative legislation. There's House Bill 282, which they don't list, by the way. You would think that the Wyoming County Commissioners would be very, very much invested in this because it would solve the property tax problem for Wyoming citizens. What it wouldn't solve, however, is the problem of the Wyoming County Commissioners not being able to spend an extraordinary amount of your money. Also, a bill that they oppose is Senate File 69. That's the Senate version of the big property tax cut bill. And if you look through this list, almost all of the conservative legislation is opposed by the Wyoming County Commissioners. Why? Because most of them aren't conservative at all. Now, as it relates to my home county, Sheridan County, we need to talk about them for just a second because I mentioned that little signature page. And by the way, I'll post that on cowboystatepolitics.com after today's episode so that you can see exactly who signed it and see who you can blame all of this misguided support and opposition to bills are. But Nick Siddle, Sheridan County Commissioner, is one of the ones is the guy who signed this piece of drivel out of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I know for a fact that Nick Siddle campaigned as a Republican. So why then did he attach his signature to a very, very liberal document? Now, I encourage all Wyoming citizens to look at this signature page and find out exactly who it is at their local county commission that opposes any form of conservative legislation. The truth is, my friends, that the Wyoming County Commissioners Association is funded by tax dollars. In fact, they collect over $500,000 of your tax dollars in dues. That's right, my friends. You pay for the dues of your county commissioners to be part of a lobbying organization. Now, make no mistake about it, my friends, any group that has the term association attached to it is a lobbying organization. It is not a governmental organization, and you pay for it. And the truth is, there are a slew of other organizations that you pay for. One of those is WAM, the Wyoming Association of Municipalities. That one, too, is a lobbying organization that argues on behalf of local Wyoming towns. I guess it shouldn't surprise you that they're not in favor of any sort of tax reform either. But if you look through the list, and I'll try to get the list posted for you later on today. I've got to go buy a scanner so I can do that for you. But it's absolutely incredible, my friends, to read through because you would think that the government that is closest to you would govern more conservatively. But that's not the case in Wyoming, and you'll quickly find that out if you read the list. Now, I mentioned that there are two big bills that are up for debate up for third reading in the legislature this morning. One of those is Senate File 69, and I've talked about this before on the program, but the Senate's version of it is a 50% tax cut on residential property across the board, and there's no provision in it to provide any funding to local towns. Now, I am kind of in favor of this, and the reason why I say kind of is any discussion of tax reduction without an accompanying discussion of reduced spending is kind of a meaningless conversation, simply because it is the spending that drives the taxes. And your local county commissioners could lower taxes tomorrow. Actually, they could do it today if they wanted to. But you'll notice that most of them don't. To my knowledge, the only county to reduce their mill levies on their citizens is Campbell County. But Campbell County is kind of a one-off simply because they have a tremendous amount of revenue from all of their mineral extraction. So Senate File 69 is up for third reading in the House of Representatives this morning. And I'm hoping by tomorrow I'll have a big story on that one to tell you about. But I kind of have to see how things play out today. The other big piece of legislation that is up is over in the Senate, and that is House Bill 199. House Bill 199 is the education savings account bill, the one that provides $7,000 to families if they want to homeschool their children or if they want to send them to private school. And this one has been really controversial because school advocate organizations have been lying across the state about it. They've tried to convince just about everybody that parents are going to receive a $7,000 check every year for their kids' education. It's not true. If you read the bill, there's going to be an approved list of vendors from which you can buy educational materials, curriculum, computers, etc., whatever it is you need to educate your kid, and you'll be reimbursed for those costs. So it's not like anybody's being cut a $7,000 check. Purchases have to be approved through the approved list of vendors. Now, when it left the House of Representatives, it was a pretty clean bill. There were no testing requirements because that's kind of the point of homeschooling your kid, that you don't want them to have anything to do with public schools. That's why you take them out of it. But the Wyoming Education Association and the Wyoming School Board Association and every other educational association sees this as a major threat to their revenue. Now, this is an interesting point. I've got an article from Wildpile here that exposes this, but just let me explain it real quick. The Wyoming Constitution mandates that the legislature fund Wyoming education 100%. You can't have a bill that reduces the amount of education funding. So says the Constitution anyway. In my opinion, that was a ridiculous idea to include that in our Constitution, but nonetheless, it's there. And in the current tax cut bill, Wyoming education is not going to see one dime less than they did last year. And it's Appropriations Chairman John Baer repeated this numerous times on the floor of the House of Representatives because it's absolutely true. There is no reduction in funding to Wyoming schools. Where they will see a reduction in funding is if a whole bunch of families pull their kids out of school, because Wyoming schools are funded per the block grant, which is relies upon the average daily membership, and that is the attendance in the school. And schools get their funding per the amount of students that they have. And if you want to know the dollar number, I'm not exactly sure what it is this year, but last year it was $19,700 per student. And so if you think about it, if a whole bunch of families decide to pull their kids out of the public school, that could result in a major funding drop for Wyoming schools. And so that right there is the reason why there is such opposition from teachers and the teachers union and the school board association against House Bill 199, because if done correctly, and a lot of families decide to homeschool their kids, it will result in a drop in revenue for the schools. But it's nothing that the legislature did. It's just a result of parents deciding that they want to homeschool their kids. From Wildpile, an article entitled Wyoming Freedom Caucus Floats Bills That Will Harm, Not Help Public Schools. First of all, just from the title, the House Bill 199 really doesn't have anything to do with public schools. The only thing it does have to do with is families who decide to homeschool their kids. There's no reduction in funding, like I mentioned, and it really doesn't affect public schools at all. But let's go to the article. And I quote, House Bill 199, the Wyoming Freedom Scholarship Act just doesn't make sense for our state, so says Amy Caldwell of Wildpile. We must be vigilant of deep-pocketed, out-of-state parties that want to destroy public education. They want to convince Wyoming citizens that universal vouchers are the future of education with misleading statements like, the money should follow the child, and public education will not be harmed by ESAs, and universal vouchers increase academic achievement. First of all, I don't see anything misleading about those statements. First of all, it's not going to harm Wyoming education at all, and it's not going to destroy public education, as Amy Caldwell says. Now, there isn't the only way that Wyoming public schools would be harmed by this ESA bill or the Wyoming Freedom Scholarship Act is if a whole bunch of parents decide to pull their kids out of public school and then that public school doesn't receive the same amount of funding because they don't have the same amount of kids. And by the way, here's how ridiculous school funding is in our state. Now, let's say, and I'll just use an example here. Let's say you pull your child out of school in Sheridan and you move to Buffalo and enroll them in public school in Buffalo. Well, you would think from the way that our schools are funded that the Sheridan school would receive $19,700 less because they have one less student. Not so, my friends. That school is funded for 3 years. And the school that they go to is also funded for that student. So really, for 3 years, the public school really doesn't lose all that much money. And I think it's on a graduated scale. But for 3 years, they still get paid for a student that's not there. So I don't see how Amy Caldwell could argue in any way that this is harming public schools. She goes on to say, we must seek truth. Interesting that she's writing an article in Wildpile and uttering the word truth, or at least writing it. Research conducted by people with a vested interest in education savings accounts prove all of these narratives to be false. So who exactly are these people? And if they have a vested interest in ESAs, why can't we tell them? Because clearly Amy Caldwell is not in favor of any sort of education savings account. But she goes on. Tax money is used to help everyone by providing things like roads, schools, and healthcare. By paying taxes, we all help make our communities better and support important services. We hate to pay them, but taxes benefit all in our community. Using the logic of the proponents of House Bill 199, school funds provided by taxes should only go to the child. For a moment, let's agree with that thinking. As taxpayers, we should only fund the government services we use. My taxes shouldn't go to subsidize Shoshone's fire station. My taxes should not fund roads built in Star Valley. My taxes shouldn't go towards child development centers, and on and on. But Amy Caldwell is missing the point here, is that Wyoming schools are funded based on how many students attend. If there's one less student in the classroom in a particular school, they receive funding for one less student after 3 years, of course. But my point here is that not only is Amy, and it's fascinating that she says, we must seek truth, and then she goes on to absolutely misinform her readers. But there again, the article's published in Wildfile, so I really don't think that we can fault her for saying things that aren't true. She goes on, some of our state representatives have a vested interest in 199 because they sit on boards of charter schools in Wyoming. I'm curious why they didn't recuse themselves or announce their conflict of interest. If 93% of students attend public schools, why does the state legislature want to use public funds for schooling only a fraction of Wyoming families use? Why is it that the small fraction of Wyoming families that want to educate their child at home or send them to a private school shouldn't have that amount of funding that we are using to fund public schools? You see, all of these arguments can be turned over and backwards, but the truth is that Amy Caldwell is just absolutely misinformed when it comes to House Bill 199. Wyoming schools are going to continue to be funded regardless of if 199 passes or not. It's just more bullcrap coming from the Wyoming media. We'll have more when we come back. You are listening to Cowboy State Politics Live on the Independence Network. You're not going to find a better source of news, information, and entertainment than right here on the Independence Network. Now, we're making a few changes, moving a couple things around. Out with the old and in with the new and that whole spiel. Of course, you could listen to my program, The Ramble Room with Ken Pendergraft, Locked and Loaded with the good Representative Tony Locke from Casper. There's a whole bunch more coming on the Independence Network. Also, don't forget to check out the articles section at the website, independencenetwork.us. It's loaded with op-eds, commentary, and news from all around the Cowboy State. You can listen to the Cowboy State Politics podcast anywhere that you get your podcasts. iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, really any of them will work. But the easiest place is just to go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. There you can find all of the shows, as well as any of the articles that I might bring up during the course of a program. That way, if your name is Joe Biden and you can't remember if you had your pudding today, well, I probably can't help you with that, but I can definitely tell you why you should have never ran for president. And now, back to our program. Welcome back to the program, my friends. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics, behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone. Documented to be almost always right 99% of the time. Welcome back to the program, my friends. To the Wyoming Turkey Vulture in an editorial entitled, "Halfway Through the Legislative Session, There's Room for Improvement." And I quote, "Wyoming lawmakers are past the midpoint of this year's 37-day general session, and we wish we could say we're encouraged by what we've seen so far. Instead, members of the 68th Wyoming legislature, especially in the House of Representatives, seem determined to push through legislation that could have serious negative impacts on the state for years to come. From large-scale property tax cuts without enough backfill that threatens public safety and the local government services to focus on hot-button national issues rather than solving the state's very real challenges." Notice they don't point out which D.C. talking points. They just say, all of these ideas come from back east. So much for specifics. Anyway, rather than solving the state's very real challenges, this session has been one disappointment after another. The common refrain from newly elected legislators is that they have a mandate and that voters told them to do these things. From what we've heard, both through public testimony and at the Capitol and in conversation, that mandate may not be as clear as they think. The good news is it's not too late to turn things around, as legislators consider bills that have crossed over from one side of the Capitol. They have the opportunity to amend or defeat these things that stand to produce a variety of unintended consequences. The first one they list is the supplemental budget. Now, remember, it was not the House of Representatives that came up with the whole idea of a supplemental budget. That was Governor Mark Gordon, and it's actually listed in the Wyoming Constitution, but the whole point of a supplemental budget is to handle things that are unforeseen, that emergency type things that you didn't know the year before, because Wyoming operates on a biennial budget. We have a budget session that lawmakers produce a budget for 2 years, but there's always things that come up, and so you've got to handle those. Here's what the Turkey Vulture says. The point of the supplemental budget, she says, the key measures of success is to fund programs and help average Wyoming residents, balance short-term and long-term savings with wise expenditures, and avoid cutting essential programs for most vulnerable Wyoming citizens. Here's their analysis of what's happened so far. Before any joint conference committee discussions began, the spending difference between the supplemental budgets in the two legislative chambers was around $109 million. Actually, that's a pretty low number by comparison to the budget difference in last year's budget session that was over $1 billion. That's billion with a B. The Senate's one-year budget adjustment contained $228 million in spending, while the House called for an additional $119 million over what was approved last year. The three biggest differences were the amount of money allocated to backfill lost property tax revenue for local governments and special districts, wildfire grant funding, and energy matching grants. We'll say more about the property tax cuts in the next section, but as far as the supplemental budget goes, neither chamber has allocated nearly enough money to mitigate the damage that would be done if the original proposed 50% cut is approved and becomes law. Now, I've talked a lot about property taxes on the program in the last couple of weeks, but as I said at the beginning of the show, if you're not going to talk about reducing spending, then any discussion of property taxes is kind of meaningless, because you have to pay for that spending somehow. And since the government doesn't have its own money, that money has to come from somebody, namely in the form of taxes. So there have to be tax cuts. Now, a lot of objections to either House Bill 169, which the Wyoming County Commissioners Association also opposes, and Senate File 69 is the question of backfill. Here's why that's a thorny issue. There are 8 counties in the state that don't bring in enough money in their residential property taxes to cover the normal expenditures of government. And so, through what we call recapture districts, Teton County is one of those, they produce a tremendous amount of money in property taxes, and the state recaptures that and then redistributes it to other poorer counties. Yeah, I know, it's a little bit socialist, but that's how our system works. So if there is no backfill, those 8 counties will be hurt specifically. Now, to varying degrees, I have to admit, because if it's just a 50% tax cut with no backfill, counties like Niobrara, and they're probably the poster child for how big of a difference there is in revenues among the counties, that's only going to result in a $70,000 hit to their revenue. That's it. They probably couldn't even buy 2 pickups with $70,000. But other counties are going to see a larger hit. Now, if you look at more prosperous counties like Sheridan, that's going to result in roughly a 15 or 16% reduction in their overall revenue, since 32% of their total county revenue comes from property taxes. But the thing that the turkey vulture is missing here is that the supplemental budget is not for backfilling. The supplemental budget is to cover things that are unexpected, like wildfires. Now, let's talk about that for just a second. If you're a rancher, fences are kind of a cost of doing business. Every single spring, you have to go out and check your fences to make sure they weren't blown down by a giant storm. Every year when we go up the mountain for the first couple of times, fencing is usually on the top of the list, because the snow drifts over the fence and it knocks the fence down. And if you're a rancher and you have things that you want fenced in, well, then you kind of have to repair a fence. It is the cost of doing business. Now, what the House did is they set up partly a grant program and partly a loan program. And it was $60 million for loans to ranchers if they needed to get some cash to repair their fence, and $40 million for grants. The Senate's version of that, however, was vastly different. And if I'm not mistaken, theirs was entirely a grant program. So basically, we're subsidizing the normal cost of doing business to local ranchers because there was a wildfire. We do live in a rural state, and sometimes wildfires happen, as tragic as it is. But it is not the job of the government, nor is it the role of taxpayers to subsidize your private business. Though we do that all the time. There are all sorts of examples of picking winners and losers in the Wyoming state legislature. And this whole fire funding thing is just the latest iteration of it. At least the House of Representatives realized that we have to have some sort of grant program, that we can't all just give money away. But still, there was that $40 million worth of grants. And so the turkey vulture goes on, and I quote, "When it comes to helping residents cover the impacts of last summer's record fire season, we'd rather see more grant money." Of course you would, because you're a pro-government, pro-big government, pro-taxation newspaper. We'd love to see more grant money offered than low-interest loans. With the state sitting on nearly $2 billion in liquid savings, we agree with Governor Mark Gordon that $130 million isn't an unreasonable request. The House of Representatives passed $100 million. Now, I don't know about you, my friends, but $100 million, that seems like an awfully big pile of cash. And if $100 million isn't enough, well, then I don't know what is. They conclude, we also were disappointed to learn that lawmakers in both chambers rejected an amendment that would have added $18 million to the Wyoming Department of Health budget to offer grants to public hospitals to support delivery and maternity care. And of course, the loss of $2.5 to $3.3 million for preserving and beginning to revitalize the High Plains Arboretum, as well as declaring it a state historic site. There's two different things here. First of all, healthcare is not the role of government, nor is it the role of government to provide taxpayer money so that we can pay doctors to be in your local community. Healthcare ought to be no different than any other part of the market, supply and demand. And if a doctor can't make enough money delivering kids in one community, they'll go to the next one. That's not the government's business, nor is it the role of government to provide money for healthcare. Now, let's talk about the tree zoo, the Arboretum. This is so far away from the proper role of government, it's not even funny. And here's the ridiculous part of this. And actually, we're right up to a break. So I'm going to go and grab a book about the Arboretum, because there's a fantastic passage in it that literally says that the Arboretum was started with pork barrel spending. That's exactly what the tree zoo is. And when I come back from the break, I'll explain it to you. Absolutely incredible, my friends. But the turkey vulture, they're all about that pork barrel spending. Get them some bacon. I'll be back in a minute. You can listen to Cowboy State Politics live every Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. on the Independence Network. Make sure that you subscribe and follow the Cowboy State Politics podcast. You can do that from the website, cowboystatepolitics.com, or anywhere that you get your podcasts. That way, you'll make sure that you won't miss a single episode of Cowboy State Politics.
Concerned about the future of Wyoming, but unsure how to help? Honor Wyoming is giving you the chance to create real, lasting influence. And it's as easy as 1, 2, 3. The Honor Wyoming Bill Tracker is designed to empower Wyoming voters. We're cutting through the noise and equipping you with all the info you need to keep tabs on Wyoming lawmakers, as well as the tools to take action on the issues that matter to you most. Keeping a close eye on key legislation in Cheyenne, we've made it easy to stay informed by providing real-time bill updates and timely take action alerts. Our one-click links make it easy to email key lawmakers at the right time. All you have to do is click and your voice will be heard. Ensuring lawmakers are listening to the people they serve year-round. Protecting the Wyoming way isn't a spectator sport, and voting is only half the story. Get involved today and do your part. With the Honor Wyoming Bill Tracker, it's as easy as 1, 2, 3.
Welcome back to the program, my friends. David Iverson, Cowboy State Politics Live. On YouTube, on Facebook, on X, on Rumble, the Cowboy State Politics Podcast. It's almost like I'm everywhere. Welcome back to the program, my friends. Cowboy State Politics Live. Now, before the break, we started talking about the tree zoo in Cheyenne. Oh, the Cheyenne Botanical Gardens, the arboretum that they want to turn into a state historic site. It shouldn't surprise anybody to know that it was built with pork barrel spending, and in fact, in a book entitled The High Plains Arboretum, written by Jekka Fries and the Friends of the Cheyenne Botanical Gardens, on the first page of the introduction, it reads, and I quote, The idea of the horticultural research station in Cheyenne came from attorney George E. Brimmer, a man passionate about community beautification. His close friend and business associate, Wyoming Senator Francis E. Warren, was a master of the political technique known as pork barreling, a term used to describe the use of general taxpayer funds for the benefit of a particular area. That's not exactly what pork barreling is, but we'll give them high marks for admitting that that's exactly what created the Arboretum. Pork barrel spending is when politicians use taxpayer funds to create their own pet projects, and F.E. Warren evidently was a master of that, admittedly by the book, and they admit that, in fact, the Arboretum is pork barrel spending, as would be any increased appropriation to keep the Arboretum open. The truth is, it is in the city of Cheyenne, and I realize that Cheyenne is the capital of Wyoming, but that is absolutely not the role of government. It is not the government's job to beautify your city, to buy more trees, to buy statues, to buy murals, or anything else. The role of the government is to handle only those things that are essential and that are enumerated in the Wyoming Constitution and the U.S. Constitution. Anything that is beyond that is not the role of government, and we shouldn't be spending taxpayer money on it. Not to mention millions upon millions of dollars. It's nothing more than a pork barrel tree zoo, and we absolutely shouldn't have any part to do with it. Shifting to some national news from justthenews.com, which I've told you, if you want a really good source, you should really check out John Solomon. He's the investigative journalist that started Just the News. But he's got an article out this morning entitled, "Bipartisan Support is Growing for Federal Legislation Addressing Cell Phones in Schools," as U.S. Representative Jason Crow of Colorado introduces his Focus on Learning Act in Congress. Now, there was a ban on cell phone use in Wyoming schools in the Wyoming legislature. I think it was brought by Senator Wendy Schuler, but it died in the ultra-super-conservative Wyoming Senate. Excuse me, what we're told is the super-ultra-conservative Wyoming Senate. That bill died. Well, fortunately, there's one at the federal level. From justthenews.com, and I quote, "The House bill would direct the U.S. Surgeon General to study the impact of cell phones on students' mental health and academic performance in elementary and secondary schools. It would also establish a federal grant program to enable certain schools to create a school environment free of mobile devices. This pilot program would authorize $5 million annually for the next 5 years to be used to provide schools with funding for secure containers and lockers for phones." I don't see any reason why a student needs to have a cell phone in a school classroom. The whole reason you're in a school classroom is to learn, and there's plenty of time outside of school hours to look at your phone. Secondly, I've talked to so many teachers and administrators that say that cell phones are an absolute distraction in the classroom. You can, most children and most adults for that matter, spend an inordinate amount of their day staring at their tiny little screen. So it just makes perfect sense to get rid of cell phones in the classroom. Nationally, we're seeing academic achievement scores dropping. And in Wyoming, there was a recent study, actually it was Senator Charlie Scott that had it last year, that over 50% of graduating eighth graders do not score at a proficient level in reading and writing. Now think about that just for a second. We can't teach half of our students how to read, and yet we're allowing them to have cell phones in the classroom. Absolutely ridiculous, my friends. From the article, quote, "Students across the country are suffering under the weight of social media and algorithms specifically created to become addictive, and they're working," said U.S. Representative Bruce Westerman of Arkansas. "Students are our future, and it's time for Congress to put our nation's young people first and cultivate the healthiest and best possible learning environment for our students." I could not agree more, my friends. Now, the Trump derangement syndrome has morphed into Elon Musk derangement syndrome. And in fact, the bureaucrat paranoia has reached all new levels as the feds are taking drastic steps to avoid Doge surveillance. Now, this is fascinating. Now, I brought you an article yesterday on the live program about how how federal agencies, even in Wyoming, are seeing drastic reductions in their workforce. And Wyoming does have an inordinate amount of government with the Bureau of Land Management, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, or the U.S. Forest Service, and all of the government agencies. And the truth is that there is no reason whatsoever that you couldn't eliminate possibly a third of the workforce. It was the government employees at the Bureau of Land Management which that came up with the Rock Springs Management Plan, which basically banned all human contact with millions of acres of Wyoming land, and the Buffalo RMP, which pretty much said, after 2040, we don't need coal anymore. We're not going to mine any coal in the Powder River Basin. Absolutely partisan decisions made by bureaucrats that don't even need to have a job there. They can find work elsewhere. You don't need to work for the federal government. Well, these bureaucracies now are kind of dipping into paranoia. And I quote, "The Trump administration's goal to eliminate wasteful programs and unnecessary government positions has sent Washington bureaucrats into a panic. Government employees are reportedly plagued with anxiety over the Department of Government Efficiency's access to various computer systems, fearing surveillance and of their communications. Some employees are paranoid that their conversations, emails, and texts could be surveilled, with some purchasing Faraday bags to block electromagnetic signals and inhibit potential surveillance, according to the Communist News Network. One employee at the General Services Administration responsible for government procurement said they no longer carry a work phone outside of the office. Quote, "I used to carry my work phone around with me everywhere after hours on the weekend in case anything was needed," the employee complained to the Communist News Network. "Now I won't take it out of my office space." The GSA, or the Government Services Administration, stated it doesn't plan to surveil its employees. Another employee at the Department of Veterans Affairs said they are leery of using their personal phone when it's connected to the office Wi-Fi and are considering covering up their computer's camera. Quote, "There is a persistent feeling that we are being watched," said the government employee. They absolutely should be. They're government employees. And guess who their employer is? Us. If they are not doing their job, they absolutely need to be fired. And we do need to have oversight of government employees at every level. That's why there's a gallery in every legislative chamber so that the public can come in and see what it is that you're doing. And I'll admit, my friends, when you're in the Wyoming House or the Wyoming Senate, down on that floor, it's pretty much like a fishbowl. You can see just about everything that is going on that floor. And I'm telling you, my friends, when you sit there all day, you would be amazed at the things that you see. And it's I'll take my camera to the Capitol today and take some pictures, and maybe I can show you some of the things that happen on the floor. But that's absolutely how our system was set up, so that government can be observed by the people that employ them. Because it is not the citizens that work for the government, it's the other way around. They are our employees. And, if they're not, and if an employee isn't doing the job, well, then what you need to do is get rid of them. Now, we've pretty much come to our last break. We're actually a little bit early, so we're going to go ahead and take a break. But when I come back, I'm going to talk to you how a very, very liberal magazine is finally admitting that there is a deep state, and that their whole purpose is regime change. Who would have thought that was coming when Donald Trump is elected president? But I'll tell you about it when we come back. Christmas is over, and all of the fun holiday cheer has been had. And what are we all left with? Frigid Wyoming weather. Below freezing temperatures that you still have to go out in. That's right, you do have to go back to work at one point or another. And not to scare you, but think about this. Every single morning, you get to scrape the ice off of your windshield. Now, while I can't do anything with that, I can make sure that your feet stay nice and toasty warm while you're doing it. All you have to do is order a pair of socks from the Buffalo Wool Company. They are the finest socks that I've ever put on my feet. And to get you a pair of them, go to the website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you're not going to be disappointed. Wyoming is one of the most sought-after places to live. There's a lot of people that want to move to our great state. And if you're thinking about selling your house to one of them, you need a real estate agent that you can trust. That agent is Rebecca Bextel at Compass Real Estate. She's lived in Jackson for almost 20 years and has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market. Last year, she sold almost $25 million worth of property. So if you're thinking of buying or selling, give Rebecca a call. Her phone number is 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
Cowboy State Politics is Wyoming's most listened to political program, documented to be almost always right 99% of the time. You can listen to the program on YouTube, on Facebook, on X, on Rumble, on the Cowboy State Politics podcast. And I've also added a new channel to the podcast where you can listen to all of the episodes of Cowboy State Politics Live. If you miss one, you can't listen to it while it's live, you can go back to it. To find the link, go to the website, cowboystatepolitics.com. And up at the top, you'll see a link that says Live Replays. That'll take you to the page where all of the Cowboy State Politics Live episodes are at. From the Atlantic, there is a deep state, and it is regime change. From the Federalist, and I quote, "The Atlantic's disinformation expert, Anne Applebaum, came right out and admitted it Thursday. The permanent bureaucracy is a, quote, regime change in the United States." The article is entitled, "There's a Term for What Trump and Musk Are Doing," and subtitled, "How Regime Change Happens in America." Her article's second line reads, "Doge and its boss, Elon Musk, have focused their activity on eradication of the federal civil service, along with its culture and values, and its replacement with something different. In other words, regime change." This is an open admission that the federal bureaucracy runs our government and that Applebaum considers the constitutional branches of President, Congress, and the federal judiciary to be impediments to its rule. It's directly in line with the views of Woodrow Wilson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Franklin Roosevelt, and other early progressives who hated the Constitution's checks and balances within a separation of powers and designed their administrative state to erase the constitutional portion of our government. Creating this unaccountable fourth branch of government was indeed a regime change, as many constitutional scholars have documented. It was a secret regime change, though, because progressives such as Woodrow Wilson, I hate that guy, and the Roosevelts kept claiming to support the Constitution. That's what we hear from politicians all the time. And it usually starts with, their phrase usually starts with, "I'm a Republican and I love the Constitution," even though a lot of the things that they do are in direct contradiction to the Constitution. If you are part of a federal bureaucracy and if you think that you have more power than the president or Congress, then you are, by definition, not following the Constitution. They may have meant a different thing by the Constitution, though, when federal bureaucrats say it, than most Americans, meaning they governed by lies. They hollowed out the real Constitution and inserted another, quote, living Constitution. That is no Constitution at all and is managed by bureaucrats essentially free from the restraints of both law and elections. Now, this whole living Constitution thing really represents the big difference between conservatives and Republicans. The Constitution means what it says, and it says what it means, and it doesn't say what it doesn't say. And the whole idea of a living Constitution is, well, things have to change with the times. It's that old Constitution. It's just a dusty old document. And, our founders, they really couldn't have foreseen everything that's happening in our country. I can tell you for a fact, my friends, and while I haven't been doing Cowboy state politics for very long, 5 years, and in my world, 5 years is kind of a long time, politics don't really change. Okay, the form of things change, but the essential points under it are always the same. You can pretty much pinpoint them: private property rights, personal freedom, free speech, the Second Amendment. I mean, all of our arguments, though they take a different form, really revolve around the same topics. Now, if you look at the Constitution, it's pretty clear that some things are very, very, very specific. For example, the Second Amendment shall not be infringed. Congress shall make no law in the First Amendment. So those two things are very clear. They're very precise, and you can't really take any other meaning from them, even though progressives and liberals have tried to change their meaning, pretty much at every turn. Now, there are other things in the Constitution that are exceedingly vague. For example, what the heck is unusual, cruel and unusual punishment? Well, the founders knew that over time, our conception of what cruel and unusual was going to be would change. For example, tarring and feathering is really kind of frowned upon now. There are many states that have done away with the electric chair, but our conception of what cruel and unusual means has really changed. And so there are parts of the Constitution that are very specific, and there are parts of the Constitution that are intentionally vague. But the truth is that Democrats and progressives look at the entirety of the Constitution, that it needs to be a living document. This is where you get absurd rulings like Roe v. Wade. Somehow, some liberal justices decided that in the 14th Amendment, the Equal Protection Clause somehow related to the killing of babies. I mean, abortion. But the word abortion or women's health care, or health care at all for that matter, is not listed in the Constitution, and therefore means that government doesn't have anything to do with it. But this whole living Constitution thing is how Democrats and progressives enact a lot of their policies, because they can say, well, really that phrase means this, and we just have to change with the times. It's absolutely ridiculous. Applebaum, who is the author, the author they're talking about in this article, knows quite a bit about regime change and communism. She's a Pulitzer Prize winning writer who studied communism in 1985 Russia, an erstwhile board member of several regime change organizations, such as the Council on Foreign Relations and Funding Endangered National Endowment for Democracy. And she's also served on an advisory panel to the Global Disinformation Index. That's a government-funded censorship program that specifically targeted the Federalist, and over which the Federalist, the Daily Wire, and Texas are suing the U.S. State Department. Quote, "The only thing these policies will certainly do, and are certainly designed to do, is alter the behavior and values of civil service." You're darn right. That's the whole point of them. That the values of civil service, and that is getting rich off of the federal taxpayer, absolutely has to change. Government service was never meant to be a lifelong career. It was never meant to be one that you could make, a fortune off of. Yet we have many federal employees that make upwards of $100,000 to $150,000 to $200,000. Far and above their private sector counterparts. See, our system has actually been kind of inverted. We are a free enterprise system, or at least that's the whole goal. And the point is, if you get a job in the private sector, you'll probably, at least this was the original intention, you'll make more money, but maybe have poorer benefits. But if you want to do civil service, you can, have a job, make a lower wage, but have extraordinarily better benefits. My friends, we've got to change how we look at taxation, how we look at our government, both the state, the county, and the federal level. It is not bureaucrats that are in charge of things. It is we, the people. And until we decide to take charge of our government, well, then things aren't going to change. Now, in Wyoming, in the last election, we added a tremendous amount of seats to the conservative seats to the legislature. And you can't interpret that in any other way than Wyoming citizens are tired of being taxed to death. We're tired of all the liberal policies. We're tired of the politicians that lie to us, that claim to be Republicans and really vote as Democrats, which, by the way, there are still a lot of those. Most of them are in the Senate. In the House, we got rid of a bunch of those. But when you have people like Cale Case and Eric Barlow and Crum, he's turning out to be kind of a liberal too. They're not really Republicans. They're not really looking out for your best interests. And we've absolutely got to replace them. Fortunately, we have elections every 2 years, and a lot of those people in the Senate, half of them, are going to be up for re-election in this upcoming election. All right, well, we've pretty much come to the end of another busy broadcast hour. Up in the legislature this morning is Senate File 69 on third reading in the House. I've been told there's probably going to be some fireworks with that one. Also, over in the Senate, there's House Bill 199, the Education Savings Account Bill. So lots to watch in the Wyoming Capitol, and I'm on it, my friends. But for now, from the depths of the Middle Swamp in Wyoming's capital of Cheyenne, I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics. See you tomorrow.